you asked whether the problem of communication, what I think. So I can answer that in one in one sentence, I think.
I thought so. We hope this will not be the conclusion.
So I hope I'm saying this right. Lasciate ogni speranza. But it's a joke because really it's the clamore pubblicitano. That's what we have to, right? So when I teach journalists, I usually start with this image of the great Dante. But I say, don't abandon hope, abandon hype, because hype is a big problem. And just before I start, I just have some disclosures. First, I'm just very happy to be here. That's my main disclosure. And then the second is I have no industry funding. I do have grants from some nonprofits who support my research. And the most important thing is all the work that I've done was with Lisa Schwartz, who tragically died a few years ago. That's actually a picture of us in the Forum in Rome about 10 years ago. So just quickly, I'm from the United States. I'm from Vermont, which is way up near Canada. And you probably know a little bit about Vermont from Ben & Jerry's ice cream and from Bernie Sanders. And the other thing about Vermont, I guess the only big thing in Vermont is maple syrup, which is good. But the other thing is sort of interesting. So I work at Dartmouth College, and Dartmouth College is in Hanover, right across the river from Vermont. And we have some Italian culture. They just opened this place, Murano Gelato. It's the best gelato in New Hampshire. And then the other thing is Dartmouth, I don't know why, but Dartmouth they've always had a really strong Italian department, and they've always had these really famous Dante professors. So anyway, so that's our other Italian connection. So, all right. So problems, with health messages are very well known. They're often exaggerated, oversimplified. We heard that before. They lack context, and they're uncritical. And that's a recipe for exaggeration. And the problem is, as a result, the public often lacks the information that they need to, and the context to make sense of claims and to decide whether or not to believe them. And it matters because this promotes unrealistic beliefs about health risks, intervention effects, and it leads to wasteful, sometimes harmful health decisions. And I think we can do a lot to help make that better. So how do people make good decisions? Well, you need the facts. You need the menu of your options, what you can do and what's likely to happen if you do something or don't do something. And then you need to have some clarity about your values, how much you care about the different things that could happen to you, or what you have to do to change the chance of these different outcomes. And it's only by putting the facts and the values together that you can get to good decisions. So it's a very simple model of decision making. The problem is it falls apart very easily if you don't have facts. Because without the facts, you can't get to good decisions. And that's a problem because in medicine and in health communication, we often don't have facts or good facts. Instead, we have stuff like this. This is an advertisement that Sloan Kettering, one of the big cancer hospitals in New York City, ran for many years in the New York Times, very high-profile advertisement. And it says, the early warning signs of colon cancer: you feel great, you have a healthy appetite, you're only 50. So I think this is a terrible message. It's really scary. It says, don't trust how you feel, don't be resilient, and if the death is right around the corner. And it's also totally exaggerated because most people who feel great, most people who have a healthy appetite, and most people who are 50 don't have and won't ever get colon cancer. So they're trying to convince people to get screened, but they're doing it in a way that I think is bad by exaggerating stuff. And these exaggerated messages are really common, and they often use fear, like in this example. But we also see the opposite. There are a lot of messages that use hope to get people to do stuff. So for example, this is a long time ago. This is in 2004 that US News and World Reports declared the end of heart disease. You're a cardiologist, right? Is there still heart disease? There still is, yeah. So that was not true. This is an amazing thing. So in 2005, so the National Cancer Institute in the United States has to go back to Congress every year to get funding. And so this year, the guy in charge in Congress asked the director, von Eschenbach, he said, what's going to happen by 2015 as far as you project it? And von Eschenbach says, no one who hears the words, you have cancer, will suffer or die from the disease. We will prevent and eliminate the outcome. So that's pretty hopeful, I would say, right? And he said if they gave them $1 billion more, they could do this by 2010. Unfortunately, they got the money, but we still have cancer and stuff. So anyway, so why is there so much exaggeration? Well, there's tons of people who have an interest in it. The manufacturers of technology need to sell their products. Academic institutions need to raise funds. Meeting organizers need to attract speakers and sponsors. The researchers need to advance their careers. The media outlets are competing for the front, for stories and advertisers, and the journalists themselves are competing for the front page. And so this is, these self-interests are all served by hype and exaggeration, by having work that's perceived to be really big, really new, really important. So, but everyone has an interest in seeing through exaggeration, because otherwise we'll end up making bad decisions. And the way to do it is by, I call it healthy skepticism. It's a way of sort of pushing back, just asking some questions. Why should I believe you? What's the evidence? And I think there's a three-prong approach. We have to deal, and we heard about this already this morning, the sources of the information need to do a better job, the media needs to do a better job, and the public, the audience, needs to do a better job. So the sources, the medical journals, the public health agencies, the regulators, industry, the people who are generating these press releases to get their messages out, they can do a much better job of being clear about what the truth is. The media, and I mean print and broadcast, but also the new social media, need to do a much better job about the way that they translate information that they get from the sources to the public. And then the public needs to do a better job asking questions, and they need to know just a little. And we'll talk about some of those skills that they need in order to see through nonsense and find out what truth remains. So I want to focus on the media this morning. I'll talk a little about the other things, but I want to focus on the media. So the media, for about 10 years, Lisa and I ran a workshop for the National Cancer Institute, a 4-day workshop for journalists called Medicine in the Media. And it was wonderful. We would get, the last year we ran it, we had 200 applicants to come for 50 slots. So it's really popular. And they came from all kinds of major news outlets. And we'd get them for 4 days. And we would try to teach them some the basic elements of transparent, clear reporting. The funding ended during the, pardon the expression, the Trump administration. But now we've been able to get funding again from this nonprofit, the Arnold Foundation. So we're starting these workshops up again. And the course goals are very basic. We want to help participants, and the participants are working journalists. We want them to learn how to interpret and reliably report the results of medical research. And we want to enhance their critical thinking skills. So we want to encourage this healthy skepticism that I mentioned. And the other thing is to foster confidence to apply that skepticism, because it does take confidence in order to talk, challenge some expert to defend or to explain why you should believe them. So we want people to understand the basics of medical evidence, how to distinguish it from opinion, to challenge their own preconceived notions, the idea that more medicine is better or that early detection is always the right answer, and to recognize limitations inherent in the scientific process. So, problems about how to make inferences from small samples, and the problems of different study designs. So we talk about the different study designs and what the different biases are. We talk about conflicts of interest, and talk about spin. We teach them not to spin, but also not to get spun, because both things happen. And then the other challenge, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in, is about communicating uncertainty, because all of the stuff that we're talking about, there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's really important to let the audiences know what we don't know or what we're not sure about. Then we also have some helpful extras. We have some extras, we teach about searching, understanding systematic reviews, a little bit about grading evidence. And then the best, I guess in my opinion, the best thing is that we summarize everything in 2 pages, these tip sheets, which I'll make available for people if you want. But the tip sheets are fun. There's 2 of them. One is about numbers, and one of them is about cautions. So the numbers one, basically, it just shows all the common statistics that you're likely to run across: absolute risk, relative risk, absolute reduction, number needed to treat, all that sort of stuff. And it explains it in very simple ways. So, for example, absolute risk reduction, we give a formula, so it's just subtracting it's absolute risk in the unexposed group minus the risk in the exposed group. And then we actually give examples written out, and then we do it in sentences so that they know how to write these things to make it simple. We also use an analogy throughout to make it simple, because a lot of people, they hear all these these jargony statistical terms and they get confused or intimidated, absolute numbers, blah, blah. It turns out everyone has all these skills already before the course. If you've ever gone to a store and there's a sale and you've been able to deal with that, you know absolutely everything that I'm going to teach in this course, right? There's a perfect analogy between shopping and these kinds of statistics. The regular price in medicine is the absolute risk in the control group. The sales price is the absolute risk in the intervention group, right? There's nothing fancy. Right? If you divide the sales price by the regular price, I don't know why you do that, but if you did that, that's the relative risk. The sale, like a 10% off sale, that's the relative risk reduction. Right? So when we work with the journalists, I say to them, there's a 10% off sale on a tie. How much will it cost? Is that they're like, no problem. And then I show them the same exact thing but using a clinical trial. And they're like, oh, it's the perfect analogy. So anyway, and the difference with the savings is just the regular price minus the sales price. The other tip sheet about cautions goes through the common problems with different designs. So like the inherently weak designs, for example, like an animal or lab study, we explain. We write out, this is how we would say the caution so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I mean, you can edit it. I mean, the journalists are real writers. I'm not a writer, but this is a way of saying it. So for example, if you're talking about an animal study, you should say, because the study was based on animals, we can't be certain whether the findings apply to people. It sounds so simple-minded, but it doesn't happen. For example, we looked at a bunch of newspaper reports about research presented at scientific meetings, and only 1 of 17 of the stories about animal studies actually said that the results might not apply to humans. So it seems kind of dopey, but it happens all the time. The other thing we do is we try to encourage the journalists to feel comfortable translating this stuff into words. So we go through this exercise of using it in a sentence. So we have the same statistic. This is about a trial where there's a difference in osteoporotic fractures, 0.27% versus 0.83% if you use this drug or not. And then we have them just say it in all different, relative risk reduction, absolute risk, and absolute risk reduction, just in words, to make sure that they're clear on how to do it. And the bottom line is, we just emphasize, wherever you can, you want to use absolute numbers and identify the outcome and give the time frame. And if you do that, you're well on your way to making sure that your audience is going to understand. So next steps for me, I'm very interested in designing and running a medicine and media workshop here in Italy. And so I've been talking to my colleagues, and I'm very excited about that. So we're going to try to develop examples that are really relevant to the Italian audience. And also the other thing is to do more to address social and non-traditional media, because that's so important, as we know, in the last couple of years. So now I just want to switch quickly to the source prong. And so we know the news. I mean, we talked about this before. That there was just a recent systematic review which said what we all know, that they looked at newspaper reports. They looked at journal reports that analyzed the quality of media reporting in the news. And they found conflicts of interest are almost never mentioned, alternative interventions aren't mentioned, potential harms are hardly ever mentioned, absolute risks are often not presented. So there's a lot of work to do. One of the problems is that the sources that feed the media are not helpful a lot. The researchers are often suggesting that their findings apply to more people than they really do, or that they're really certain, even though the science may be really uncertain, and they fail to acknowledge study limitations. So they feed that to the journalists. So the journalists, it's not, you can trace these problems back. It's very easy to blame journalists, but I don't think that they're the problem. And then the other thing are press releases. And again, the researchers are awful. In a systematic review of academic center press releases, so these are these fancy scientists from like reputable academic centers, 1/4 of the researchers' quotes in our study were really exaggerated. And this is an example. This is a press release about a study, and it was scientists inhibit cancer gene potential therapy for up to 30% of human tumors. That sounds really good. And human tumors, right? It was a study of mice for skin cancer. And this is the quote from the lead investigator. He said, the implication is that a drug therapy could be developed to reduce tumors caused by RAS, it's a gene, without significant side effects. Again, that sounds great. The problem was there was absolutely no human testing of efficacy or tolerability. I mean, this is just nonsense. Academic medical center press releases are the most direct way that these academics try to communicate to the world. They do it through journalists. And we looked at a lot of them, and over a third failed to quantify results. So how can you judge something if you don't even have quantify the results? And when they were quantified, over half used formats that exaggerate the magnitude of findings. So they use relative risk without giving the absolute risk. So 27% reduction without saying the starting risk. They give you the sales, it's a 20% off sale, but they don't tell you the regular price. So you can't decide whether it's a good sale or not. And they often don't talk about limitations. As I said, the animal and lab studies claiming human relevance almost all fail to talk about the fact that there's very little translation to human health. See the same thing in the medical journals. We actually interviewed a bunch of press officers at the top medical journals in the United States, and none of them had any data presentation standards for how information should be conveyed in press releases. None of them required statements about limitations. So it's a recipe for exaggeration. And it matters. Lisa and I wanted to see whether it actually made a difference, so we studied a bunch of journal articles. We took 100 medical journal articles, consecutive journal articles from the New England Journal, JAMA, all the fancy journals. We looked at the consecutive ones that were about intervention studies that generated any media coverage. And so we took the first 100, and we found 68 of them issued a press release, and those generated like 759 stories. We didn't have enough time to do them all, so we sampled 343. And we assessed the quality. And we found that we looked at the quality of the information in the press release and the quality of the information in the news report. And basically we found that if the press, like this is an example of quantifying the results. The results in the news story were quantified 31% of the time if the press release didn't quantify it. So if the press release was bad. If the press release was good and it did quantify the result, then 61, almost twice as many gave the information. And if there was no press release, it was a little bit worse. So, and you see the same pattern for things like harms mentioned in the news story or limitations. The point is, a good press release seems to make the news media coverage better. A bad press release makes the news media coverage worse. So it's a really important lever. And so we're actually trying to develop some standards for like a consort for journal reporting, like a consort for press release writers. So bottom line, sources exaggerate, press releases matter. And as I said, we're trying to, the quality is low, but we're trying to develop this set of guidances. The last thing I want to talk about is the audience. So you can have the best message in the source and really great journalists, but if the public doesn't understand stuff, then you're going to fail. So we decided that the same stuff that we teach journalists should be taught to the public. And we wrote this book called Know Your Chances. I have a copy here if anyone wants to look at it afterwards. And I have a more fun version of it also with cartoons, if I can show you. But anyway, but the idea, and it's available for free. It's in English, but it's available for free from the National Library of Medicine in the United States. If you go there, you can get it. And the idea is it provides tools to help people see through hype, communicate transparently, and hopefully make better decisions. And the way the book works, it's example-based. There's quizzes so you can track your progress and become confident that you understand stuff. There are learn more boxes, like so if you get the basic concept but you want to go into more depth, it'll do that. And then there are handy references for you. And basically the 4 parts. What's understanding risk, understanding if risk can be reduced, asking does risk reduction, do interventions have downsides? Because some interventions work, they all have harms. And then developing healthy skepticism. And as I said, the idea, it's the same basic concepts as we teach the journalists. So these research basics, design information, communication stuff, something about observational studies and confounding randomized trials. And we also have a bit about screening and overdiagnosis, because that's just a hobby of mine. So we were real excited about the book, but we decided to see if it really would work, because we're supposedly scientists talking about evidence. So we thought, well, why don't we see if our book really works? So we did a randomized trial. We actually did 2 randomized trials. One in the worried well, so these like healthy, rich, people. These were alumni of Dartmouth. And we also did a low SES trial, socioeconomic status. So people with less education, less income, people who really need this information. And the trials were the same. We randomized people to either get the book, which we call the primer, or a control booklet, which I'll show you in a second. And then it was the same in both trials, same design. And then here's the control booklet. It's from one of the big public health agencies in the United States. I got yelled at because they were very angry and insulted that we used them as the control placebo group. It was more of a nocebo, actually, because it's a terrible book. Anyway, but it just had general information about risk. It just threw a lot of words at people, didn't explain stuff. Anyway. So the primary outcome, how do you decide if it works? What's the outcome measure? There was no outcome measure, so we had to invent one. And so we did all this work. We had validated this measure. Anyway, it's called the Medical Data Interpretation Test. It's an 18-item test, and it's scored on a 0 to 100-point scale. And basically, it asks people to interpret real information. So we'll show them an ad or a newspaper story or a press release, and we'll ask them questions to make sure that they understand stuff or they see what's missing. It tests the same skills as the primer. And the bottom line is it seemed to work pretty well. This shows how many people, we gave them a test. 75 or higher was considered passing. And in the high SES group, there was about an 18 percentage point improvement. So people went from about a little under 60% passing to about 80% passing, which is I felt pretty good. And in the low SES group, again, the baseline is lower because these guys had less knowledge to begin with, but we had a similar absolute increase in their scores. And what's the main thing here is those numbers might not look that impressive. This is a totally pragmatic trial. All we did was we randomized people, we mailed them a copy of the book, and we said, take a look at this book, and in a week we're going to ask you some questions. So it's pretty impressive. And most people rated, they said they enjoyed reading it, they thought it was fun. So, bottom line. The magnitude of the effect is in line with other successful educational interventions. So I think it worked. So, all right. And we're not the only people doing this stuff. There's other people who are doing really good stuff. So there's the group, the Testing Treatment International group, which is great. Here's the website. I encourage you to look at it. And Informed Health Choices is a group. It's a lot of the same people, but it's really fabulous. And you guys are actually doing work with them to help teach kids, which is the most important thing. And then my stuff is all on this website named after Lisa Schwartz Foundation. And everything, tip sheets, the books, everything is there. All the articles and everything that we've ever written, they're all there. And so I want to thank you. But before the end, so the tip sheets, I should have printed them out, but I'll make them available because they're just two-sided things, but they summarize everything that you need to know about everything. So I guess that's an exaggeration. Anyway, thank you.